So that, I mean, you used the word uncomfortable earlier. I really like that because it's not just about a process. You know, a CIO and CFOs, you know, we've been educated and trained our entire lives to build business cases based on what do we think the ROI is going to be. Now AI is making us think very differently, and we have to think differently. So we have to put our toes into the water. We have to invest while we're hoping that, you know, we identify what the value is, and we get to a point where we can then reasonably confidently say what we think the ROI is likely to be. That's a change management issue, surely.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where you need often a very senior look on this. So to shift the discussion away from the technology, away from not completely the ROI, but first thinking, what is the value that we need to achieve, that we want to achieve, that we must achieve, in terms of not, let's say, table stakes, that, you know, we have to have a certain efficiency through a co-pilot that we have or a chatbot that we have to access our knowledge, but really to see if we can protect our margins or improve them, if we can protect our business on this, if we can protect or grow the business through AI on this.
That elevates the conversation.
Exactly. It elevates it not just to the CIO level, but to the C-suite level and the board level, and even including the investors on this. We see now we can have an ambition that is a 10x, a 20x kind of concept for the investment. And now we don't even need to see if the investment perhaps takes a little bit more than we planned for. But you need to firmly have that value ambition in your eyes, and requires therefore a senior stakeholder management.
Yes, to really be behind that. I really like that distinction, but it is, as you say, uncomfortable and very different for most C-levels. If we think about operating model failures, you know, what kind of failures do you see, and, you know, or mistakes or challenges do you see the most?
Well, we spoke about the governance ones. I think oftentimes we do see governance structure being created before it's being useful. So I think that's a very common one. Like we said, it's something that is in the DNA of a company as well, where we have mainly policies first that are based on a fear of AI not doing the right thing. Rightfully so. However, oftentimes, you know, putting us in a situation where we feel uncomfortable to move at all. I think the second one is something I lived through in a previous wave, where it was about data lakes. It's about this data platform or data architecture modernization as a goal in itself, where it's a significant amount of effort, you know, to standardize some of the perhaps bespoke or legacy systems, the data pipelines, which comes with a huge amount of effort and still does not solve one of the fundamental problems that we had back in the data lake days, which is we don't know yet for what we need the data. And if you design it such that you have a heavy pipeline usage, typically your cost goes up.
Right, yes, of course.
And you still have not achieved any value. By itself, the modernization does not provide more value. You need to therefore, again, have the value lens first on. And I think that is similar to this third pattern, which is something that by nature of how the business works and how perhaps also consultancies work, is we often underestimate the amount of effort it takes to put something into production. So you have the concept of seeing if the technology works in a proof of concept. We have the concept of a proof of value, where we actually say we can demonstrate reliably that the ambition is directionally right. But the problem is that unless it goes into production, unless you are able to overcome all the frictional elements that make this work in your operations, you do not have that proof of production that brings the ultimate value on this. And I think this underestimation of that effort often leads to a bit of a shock once you pass that proof of value and you see like, oh my God, this is actually much, much harder than we thought because we didn't design the proof of value with the production goal in mind.
So you then found yourself in a situation where you've managed yourself to think about the ROI at a later stage. You think about the value that you want to create. You've taken that value to your board and to your investors, and everybody's behind it. But ultimately, the proof of production is the ability to execute and realize the promised value. And if you don't have that, now what does proof of production? Why is that distinction so important?
Well, I think that the value really tries to demonstrate how the ambition can be achieved on paper.
Right.
Let's say it like that.
Okay.
You do change management as well in a very bounded way on this, but oftentimes, the promised land is not something that we see achieve. I mean, that all the numbers show that more than 90% of the companies fail exactly in that gap, exactly in the problem of putting something into production, seeing that it's actually much, much harder. You have to demonstrate that the solution can survive the operational reality.
Right.
And that means, real data. It means real workflows, the constraints that you have, the quality issues, the user adoption, the compliance in complex or regulatory systems. And oftentimes also the operational complexity. You might have multiple sites, and what works here in this country does not work in the same way on the other one. So in many environments, in most environments that I encounter, that is the actual real test. And that's why I think that distinction is so important, that you should strive, yes, of proving the value, but at the end, what you need to do is you need to prove the production. And
to what extent does skill come into that? So, if you think about, it's easier. I mean, in a previous conversation, you've talked about, slices of production where you really put it to the test. You then take it, there is in my head, I'm thinking there's a skills gap potentially within the organization. Do you bring a partner in at that point? Do you, how do you manage that transition to kind of maximize your success?
Yeah.
Or do you create an organization internally? What are you seeing, and what's your experience from that?
Well, we all know that having AI talent is there's a war out there. It's very difficult and very pricey. So if you have to first hire, we're potentially falling again into the trap of creating first a governance, a budget, an organizational structure. Who do they report to? What are they accountable for?
Yeah.
So these things slow down, but also create a financial burden for the company without it knowing if this actually can work for them.
Right, yes.
So I think it is smart if you try to see how can I prove that value and prove the production with at the same time de-risking my investment such that I can pull the plug on that. You cannot just say, oh, that was nice hiring you and you have to go now again because it didn't work. So I think that's an essential part where one can partner with a trusted partner, especially when it gets to your core operations, which is your heartland, your IP. And I think it's important to distinguish not about the make or buy, but more about what is our moat and how do we strengthen it? Is it through AI, or is it AI our moat? Most companies would say the former, not the latter, which means that they need the help of this disruptive technology to strengthen what they're really good at. And for that, then I think the natural question is like, okay, so do you have to build that muscle yourself as a high expense, or at least de-risk it at first and say, let's show that we can actually prove this into production, and then to see what differentiator this brings into the future. We talked a little bit about offensive versus defensive strategy. So one needs to be the focus of your operational excellence.
Yes.
That what you do good, you do better. What you do good, you do more. The scale and the differentiator. And then you need to also think about, well, how am I going to be still relevant in the future where a lot of the value chains are moving through agentic, but through a lot of these new business models. So it might become a muscle that you need to have internally. But I think for that journey, to partner up with somebody who's experienced in that really is highly valuable. And then even a partnership can endure over a long time if it becomes a differentiator.
Absolutely.